Welcome to Twist of Truth, where every person has a story. Imagine coming home after nearly a decade, eager to surprise your loved ones, only to be greeted by a nightmare you never thought possible. That moment when your entire world collapses in front of your eyes, and you realize you've been living a lie. This isn't just another story of heartbreak. It's the raw and gut-wrenching reality of betrayal, deception, and a thirst for vengeance. Stay with me because this tale only gets darker and more intense as it unfolds. After 9 long years working abroad to provide a better life for his family, David, a 38-year-old construction manager, decided to return home without telling anyone. His whole plan was centered on one thing: surprising his wife Emma and their son, Noah. As his plane touched down, he felt a rush of excitement and anxiety. Would they be thrilled? How much had things changed? David had envisioned the reunion countless times, but he never imagined what he was about to witness. David arrived at his suburban house around 11 a.m. The house was eerily quiet. Of course, Noah would be at school. He smiled, thinking of his son's laughter, his growth over the years, and how he couldn't wait to see him after all this time. But his wife, Emma, she should have been home. As David stepped inside, everything seemed normal, even the familiar scent of lavender candles she always burned. But something felt. Walking through the living room, David noticed that the door to their bedroom was slightly ajar. His pulse quickened. At first, he thought it was nothing, just his nerves, his excitement getting the better of him. But as he pushed the door open just a little further, his heart nearly stopped. There, lying in his bed, was Emma, but she wasn't alone. Tom, their neighbor from a few houses down, was in bed with her, his arms wrapped tightly around Emma. David's world collapsed in an instant. He couldn't move. He couldn't scream. He couldn't even breathe. It felt as if his heart had been ripped from his chest. How could this be happening? The woman he had loved for 15 years, the woman he sacrificed everything for, was now with someone else, someone who had no right to be there. David silently stepped back, closing the door without a sound. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he leaned against the wall for support. He felt nauseous, his stomach twisting in knots, and sweat pouring down his face. Was this real? He needed a moment to process, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene over and over again. Suddenly, their voices pierced through the air, shattering the silence. "You're so much hotter than your husband," Tom whispered with a laugh, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Stop it, Tom," Emma giggled. "I told you not to bring him up when we're together. It's just gross. And besides, it ruins the mood." David's blood boiled. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every word felt like a dagger to the heart, twisting deeper and deeper. Then Tom continued, "How long do you think it'll be before he comes back for good?" Emma sighed. "Hopefully, not for a long time. But even if he does, he won't know about this. Besides, Tom, I'm pregnant with your child. We'll just pretend it's his. He won't suspect a thing." David froze. Pregnant? With Tom's child? His entire life was a lie. The family he had worked so hard to build, the son he adored, and now, this child? He stumbled back, barely able to hold himself upright. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have ever imagined. But he didn't confront them. Not yet. He needed to think. He needed to plan. David slipped out of the house and sat outside on the curb, his head in his hands. His entire life felt like it had been ripped apart in the span of minutes. He stared at the house, thinking of all the memories they had built there. And now it was nothing more than a hollow shell. For hours, David waited. He watched as Tom eventually left, adjusting his clothes as he exited the house. David knew this wasn't a one-time affair. This had been going on for months, maybe even years. But now, armed with the truth, David was ready to act. He wasn't going to let Emma and Tom get away with this. That evening, David made his way over to Tom's house, knocking on the door with a calm demeanor. When Tom's wife, Sarah, answered, she looked surprised. "David, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Sarah. It's about your husband." David explained everything, from what he had witnessed earlier to the conversation he overheard. Sarah's face went pale, and she began shaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the man she trusted had been betraying her all along. David and Sarah, both broken by their respective spouses' deceit, hatched a plan together. They would confront Tom and Emma at the same time, catching them in the act. But David had another idea brewing in his mind, something darker, the confrontation. Later that night, David and Sarah returned to David's house. From the outside, they could see the dim glow of the bedroom light. They heard the soft strains of music playing, Kumar Sanu's romantic ballads. As if the world was mocking David. With a deep breath, David opened the door quietly. There, in the same position as earlier, were Tom and Emma. The betrayal was so blatant, so revolting, that Sarah gasped, alerting the parents. They jumped out of bed, eyes wide in terror. David, Emma screamed, pulling a blanket over herself. "I can explain." David said nothing. Sarah, on the other hand, was trembling with rage. Her eyes locked onto Tom, the fury he had never seen before. "You disgusting piece of trash," she screamed, grabbing a heavy vase from the dresser and hurling it at him. The vase shattered against Tom's head, blood dripping down his face. He stumbled backward, groaning in pain. Emma was sobbing, pleading with David to forgive her, but David remained silent, his gaze icy and distant. Sarah wasn't done. She lunged at Tom, but David grabbed her, pulling her back. "Let them feel what it's like," David whispered to her. "But we're not going to jail for these two." David and Sarah left the house that night, but David wasn't finished. He had one last thing to do. He returned a few hours later, carrying a can of gasoline. He poured it around the perimeter of the house, his house, where his memories had been tainted, where his love had been betrayed. He struck a match and watched as the flames consumed everything, the house, the memories, and the two people who had shattered his life. As the fire roared, David walked away, the orange glow lighting up the night sky, but he smiled for the first time in months. Justice had been served. What would you do if you found out your life had been a lie? Betrayal can push people to their limits, and sometimes it has deadly consequences. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories of revenge and justice.